Welcome to the Kingsford Flivver Flash. I'm Coach Van Dusen. This is Season 20, Episode 16, A Coach's Corner, Youth Football Part 3 with Eric Johnson. Welcome back to the Kingsford Flivver Flash, and thanks for watching on YouTube. Before you forget, please mash that subscribe button and ring that notification bell so you always are updated when we publish a new episode, which during the off season here, we've been doing pretty regular. About every other week, we've been pushing out an episode. So this episode is pretty great. We have Coach Eric Johnson, who has 4 boys that are all Flivvers right now, and he's been coaching football for quite a while at the youth level. He also has a unique experience in that he is a former military doctor with the Air Force, and he is a current doctor here in Dickinson County. So he is able to talk with us about different injury prevention things and the number one headline in the news right now, the COVID-19 pandemic. So let's get started. Well, thanks for coming on, Eric.
Hey, Coach, how you doing?
Doing good. Hey, start off by just kind of introducing yourself and telling the folks what you do for a living. It's pretty interesting.
Sure. So my family, we're new-ish to the area. We moved to Iron Mountain, Kingsford area about 3 years ago. Okay, we have roots in the UP, in Marquette, in Iron River for myself, and in Stevenson for my wife. But I've been gone for quite a long time as a military doctor and doing some other things. So it's great to be back. We've been here now 3 years. Kingsford schools have been terrific for my kids. I couldn't ask for a better situation. And as soon as we get over this pandemic and back into normalcy, I think we're going to continue to thrive here, and we look forward to it. So a little bit about me. I've coached at the youth level for about 11-ish years in some capacity. Was a former player and college player myself, and from a career standpoint, I'm the trauma medical director, and I'm an emergency physician at Dickinson Memorial, and part-time as well over in Iron River. So that's my background. My family and my wife Rachel is a teacher who has been home with the kids quite a bit, and now is rolling back into teaching. And so some of the kids, a lot of the kids know her from her time subbing at the school. She's very involved. She's around the school a lot. So we try to be as plugged in with the school as we can. And then my 4 sons, Elliot will be a senior, Al will be a junior, Noah's going to be a freshman, and then Ben will be a 6th grader this year. So that's the crew. That's exciting. And you mentioned you were a military doctor. I want to thank you for your service. And what branch of the military were you in? And what kind of was your job? Pretty interesting. I was an Air Force flight surgeon. And most recent assignment was with the Contingency Response Group out of Guam, where I was search and rescue doc, tactical doctor, and taught tactical medicine. Did a lot of disaster relief, some presidential travel support, and a few other things like combatives and anti-terrorism instructing as well. So it was a good assignment, but a lot of time away. And as the kids got older, it was time to phase out of the military and into more normal life. So right, hey, and you can relate to that yourself. I can. I understand that completely. But again, thank you for your service. And with the coronavirus pandemic being the hot topic and sometimes the only topic in the news, can you talk just a little bit about that with your physician experience and the infection, how it spreads through kids, how it spreads with adults, and just kind of those differences? Sure. And there's a lot of information out there about coronavirus, and you can't run away from it on the radio, on the news, on social media. It's everywhere. We're all tired of hearing about it. We're all tired of dealing with it, but the reality is we're stuck with it for the foreseeable future. And this social distancing is important. The extremes that we're at right now can't go on forever. We can't sustain being cooped up in our basements forever. So we're going to have to come into a new normal where we try to prevent infection of others as best we can. And it's the same thing that they've been talking about from the start. That hasn't changed. Of all the new information that we've had in this direction or the other direction. What hasn't changed is, if you're sick, you have to avoid being around others. And if you're well, you want to try to stay that way and avoid getting the illness. And for most people, it's a mild illness. But for the elderly and those at high risk of complication, it's very deadly. So we want our athletes, we want our students to remember to avoid touching their face and avoid going out in public when they're sick, monitoring themselves for symptoms, and keeping their distance. We don't want to see, kids packed into small spaces and sharing from food containers and dipping their hands in the same bag of Doritos. It would be good for them to stay away from Doritos in general, but
right.
Especially now. So it's a good time to make some changes like that. And as we phase back into football and into school, we're going to have to really watch that and police each other, so.
And I've seen a lot of student athletes out doing workouts, but outside running the Pine Mountain stairs. I see them out, in grassy areas running routes, and they're sharing a football. But how does it spread differently between, say, an elderly person or the symptoms, I guess, between an elderly person and, say, a 15-year-old?
Yeah, and that's one of the challenging things about this illness is because we're finding that somewhere between a quarter and a half of people who are infected and possibly contagious with it may not even know that they have any sickness at all, right?
Okay.
And that pertains in particular to the young folks who are healthy and can deal with illness better than the elderly. The specific molecule on the cells that allow entry of that virus into the cells, that's a receptor I call the ACE3 receptor that's expressed in greater numbers as a person ages. So the elderly are much more prone to get this, and it hits them harder and faster. And that's why, it was one of the reasons why it's more fatal to those that are older. So we're gonna have to teach our players to recognize that anything that comes out of their body at any time potentially could be infectious. So you can't stop breathing, you can't stop sweating. You just have to make sure you minimize the amount of breath and sweat and spit and saliva that comes in contact with other people, and hand washing and avoiding touching the face and those things. So they may not feel sick, but they might infect their parents or their grandparents, and we want to minimize that as much as we can. So
right now, you kind of alluded to this, but if if we have 30 players in a locker room, there's a lot more potential for spread than if we have 30 players, say, out running sprints outside.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing. So what about, I've heard mixed reviews on surfaces. Some people say, or some reports are saying it'll live for days on a surface, and other reports say, no, it doesn't live hardly at all on a surface. What can we do, say, in a locker room or in a weight room when we're allowed to go back to help prevent the spread via surfaces?
Yeah, well, first we're going to tell people not to lick things in the locker room, right? So
good call.
I think that's pretty much a good rule in general. Thou shalt not spit on others. That's another good rule to live by.
Good call.
I think that's written down somewhere. No, we are already, and we were talking about this topic even before coronavirus hit us, about how we want to keep that space clean in the field house and in the weight room. And we'll be more vigilant about that. That needs to be something that happens not just once a day, but probably several times a day, that the spaces get cleaned and the surfaces that we touch, the weight bars, the dumbbells, the pull-up racks, those get wiped down, really regularly. And we have containers right there with cleaning products to do that. Will the governor give us a restriction of how many kids can be in a weight room at one time or in the locker room at one time? That remains to be seen. That's another reasonable measure. I don't know how practical that's going to be, because your team number is what it is and your space for training is what it is. So I don't know how well that's going to work out, but I guess we'll see here soon. Have you heard any rumors about what these announcements may be on June 1st and what potentially we'll be allowed to do?
I have not. I know the UP is in a different zone, I guess, compared to downstate. So I'm sure, our coaching brothers and sisters downstate are probably going to be looking to the UP for what we're doing to figure it out. And maybe it's, rotating times through the weight room. Like you're saying, if we have to stagger it, maybe, if your last name starts with A, B, or C, you come at 8 o'clock, D, E, and F, you come at 9:30. I mean, there's going to be a ton of different people trying a ton of different things. And I think, just being connected with other teams via social media and, some emails and phone calls and whatnot. And we should be able to come up with some best practices, hopefully, for engaging our players as well as keeping them safe. So hopefully it all works out and we can play a little ball this fall. But
that's the hope. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier, and the reason you're on, this is the third of a 3-part series we've been doing on youth football coaches, and having 4 boys all playing football. I've had the honor of coaching 2 of them so far, hopefully a third this fall. But tell us a little bit about coaching youth football, just in general, and then we'll continue from there.
Yeah, I love youth football. I think it's critical for kids to play sports, and it's not that only football is the only sport that we want kids to play. We want kids to be active. We want them to learn the concepts of teamwork and selflessness, and football. Of course, I'm partial. I've got sons who play football, and that was my favorite sport too. But as a team sport, there just aren't other sports like it, right? You know that.
You're right.
The roles on the field, you have 10 guys performing in a way that is intended to help the guy with the ball or the guy that's getting the ball. So you've got 10 unsung heroes potentially at any given moment, working hard and sacrificing for somebody else. That's the kind of selflessness that football teaches that other sports just don't have as much of that. And,
I agree 100%. And I look at the NBA as kind of the exact opposite of that, where watching the NBA, I feel like I'm watching 5 different one-on-one games. And you have the best player going against the best player, but it's not as prevalent as I would, like back in the 90s when I consider the heyday of NBA basketball, maybe even the 80s. But you don't see that team, and you don't see that selfless service of that guard who makes a great lead block on that linebacker isn't going to get his name in the paper. It's going to be that speedster that scored the touchdown. So, when we're talking youth football, have you coached 5th grade through 8th grade, or what type of football are we talking?
I've followed my kids as they've come up through. So I want to say the youngest age I did was maybe 3rd grade when we were down in Lowell. Previous to moving up here, we did two stints in Lowell, Michigan, one for 3 years, one for 5 years. Nice quality, small town, Division II school for football with a good heritage there. So it was a great place for my kids to learn to play football and to wrestle. I think the youngest age was 3rd grade, and then I would bounce around between the different kids a little bit too, depending on my schedule in any given season. I've always kind of had a strange work schedule. Now I'm a little more reliable, so I've been able to take on more expanded roles and play head coach rather than assist, and which is what I did last year with 7th and 8th grade. So the last 3 years, I've coached 7th and 8th grade ball in the youth league here. So I think 3rd grade's a little bit young for contact football. Not many towns have that. 5th and 6th grade gets a little bit young too, and then once you get to 7th and 8th grade, that's where these kids start to develop into young men. They're no longer all boys. Some are still pre-adolescent and they haven't quite hit their stride developed, and some are turning into young adult men. So that 7th and 8th grade ends up being a challenging group to coach because you have such a disparity between the big kids and the little kids.
Oh, absolutely.
You got to keep the small ones healthy and interested in playing football and not feeling like they're getting thumped on every snap by these bigger kids that have armpit hair, and they're still talking with a squeaky voice, you know. So
I know when I taught in Lance, I taught sixth grade, and then I coached varsity football. And the difference, you know, when you see the kids come in as sixth graders, like you're saying, even in sixth grade, some are as tall as me, and others have not hit that stride yet. And then it's so interesting to watch them grow up. And then by the time they're juniors, you know, some of those kids that had the early growth spurt have stopped, and the younger ones have overtaken them. So when you're talking youth football, and that's pretty tough, but what do you think is the hardest part? Like when we get them at the higher levels, they know how to do a 3-point stance. They know the basics of football gameplay, but down in the 7th grade, 8th grade, if that's their first year playing, what's the hardest part that you've noticed?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges is the safety and making sure we keep them healthy and protect their heads more than anything else. We have more concussion awareness now in football than we've ever had. I think that's a great thing. I'm not just saying that because I'm a doctor. I think that's great that we pull kids out from contact-related headaches that probably aren't a concussion, but we protect them as much as possible. So much of the tackling that happens at that age is, you know, those rodeo kind of tackles where a jersey gets grabbed and the kid gets slung to the ground and his head gets bounced off the ground, not because it's direct helmet-to-helmet contact. It's just him with centripetal force spinning to the ground and bouncing his head off the ground. And that leads to headaches and head injuries and concussions for these kids. And my first few years up here, and we saw more of that, way more of that than I wanted to. One is too many, but we had several. We had to end the season short because of injuries. A lot of those injuries were contact-related headaches and mild concussions. We adapted the tackling to fit more of the USA football model, or the Seahawk tackling, the Hawk tackling model, where it's more back shoulder, more rugby-style tackles, and trying to minimize head-to-head and head-to-chest collisions. And I think that's helped quite a bit. So I'm a big believer in that. So I would say that's the answer. The biggest challenge is keeping the kids safe, especially those kids we just talked about, the younger ones that aren't yet developed. They're going to get there, but they're yet. They're just a step behind. And genetically, there's nothing they can do to change that. We got to keep them safe and keep them interested in playing football or sports in general. You know?
Exactly. So something I'm sure when you played, and I know when I played, the idea behind tackling was get your head across, you know, get your head in front, and that's just what we've all learned. So how is that teaching the younger players, especially when they go home and tell their dads this is what they're doing for tackling? And it's something totally, you know, we'd like to say it's new. I think Pete Carroll came out with it in 2012 or 2014. So it's fairly new.
Yeah, right about there.
But in rugby, it's been around for forever. That's just how they do it. So what have you seen? How is that teaching went?
Yeah, if you look at how kids intuitively tackle, they are already wanting to do a lot of that. And in the past, we've almost had to untrain them from that method and teach them to get their head across rather than you know, grab a waist and roll them to the ground. I think what makes it easy, and discussing that with parents or the community in general, is that we're adopting a method that's the safest possible that we know of right now.
Exactly.
You know? And be able to say that in all seriousness, that there's no safer method to tackle that we've come across, or that we've found. This is it, and this is what we're doing. And that's not to downplay other people's methods, but it's nice to be able to say we've done everything we can to keep kids safe, right? So,
perfect. And I know, I think we're very, very blessed here at Kingsford to have some of the best helmets money can buy. We have top of the line shoulder pads. We have, you know, all the integrated girdle stuff, and all of our coaches are 100% on board with having the best equipment and doing everything as safely as possible. And I think, you know, that's way more important than winning a game is keeping these kids safe and having a positive experience. especially at the youth level, because like you're saying, we want them to come play again, and not just football, but baseball, basketball, hockey, wrestling, all of those sports that make high school, so much better.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, that's the thing I hate most about football is the injuries, and to see kids have their season cut short or have their time in football cut short and lose the opportunity to have the character development that comes along with team sports in general and football in specific. It's something that I hate to see it when that happens,
Yeah,
so.
and it's interesting to me, talking a little bit about injuries. Coach Millala always talks about, are you injured or do you just have a boo-boo?
Yeah.
And that's, I've seen and I've read articles and seen YouTube videos where high school kids are playing with like legit broken bones.
Mm-hmm.
I just read a book about a football coach down in Texas, and the kid broke his leg, but he went out and continued to play quarterback for the second half. And it's like, that's pretty extreme. And you wouldn't do that for just anybody. There's obviously a big love for his team there. And then you see other players who get their foot stepped on and they got to take a series off. So it's just interesting to see how different players deal with what I would call adversity. We've all had our hands stepped on and our feet stepped on, and you get a bump or a bruise. And so it's just interesting to see how different players deal with that.
Yeah. And that's part of their developmental process. They learn that along the way. Some kids we want them to know when, exactly like you said, when they're hurt and when they're just tired or they're injured or they need a break, and learning those little lessons about how to pick yourself up off the ground when you just got run over, but you're not hurt, and go back at it again. That's it sounds archaic. It sounds like a caveman talking when you say that's a good thing for these kids to understand, but it is a good thing for these kids to understand. That's life. Life is not, no one wins every game. You don't, in any sport, you got every team but one is going to lose in the end. So what you do after that loss, that's what defines your character, I think, much more than what you do after a win.
No, I agree. And you just reminded me of a story from this past season. We had a player that got tackled pretty hard and kind of laid on the ground for a second, while everybody cleared up, and then they got up, and Coach Murdoch, he goes, "Hey, don't do that. Like, if they hit you, you jump back up." And a few plays later, he got absolutely rocked. This is down in Menominee. And before anybody, he was the first one up. I mean, he jumped up and like looked at the kid that hit him like, what now?
Yeah.
And it's how you deal with that. And I'm sure he had the wind knocked out of him, just the way he got hit, but he wasn't going to show any of that weakness. And I think that particular player really developed a lot that day. And he wasn't injured. He had a boo-boo, but he picked himself up and he went right back at it. So it's not normal. Football is not a normal game. It's not normal to throw your body against somebody else's. It's just not.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. And I really enjoyed talking about how it works at the younger levels, because I coached 7th and 8th grade 1 year. But then I've been on the upper levels where I'm coaching young men and not boys. So,
yeah, and a lot of those kids at that level have never had to do anything like that ever before. They've never had some big kid drive them into the ground. Never. So that takes a little getting used to. That dovetails into one of my favorite memories, I think, maybe of all time, was the last game of the season for the JV squad this year. So Kevin Murdoch's last game coaching,
Yes.
Sad to see him go after so many years here doing great work. He's left such a big impact on the kids, and you could tell that impact in the way they played for him in his last game. I don't know if you were there or not, but they went up by a few scores on Marquette. Big program, lots of kids, lots of big athletes. I think physically, a team that we were overmatched against. And they started to realize that they could score points on us in the second half, and they were having some success, and they were storming back. And then all of a sudden we started seeing injuries happen for the kids. That's the game where Levi Ferrucci, ended up with a tibial plateau fracture in his leg, broke his leg, tried to still play on it, broke his leg. Ben Pickett tore his knee ligaments. Alistair Johnson, my son, had a high ankle sprain that he could barely put any weight on, and all those kids kept fighting as best they could, and to see a lineup of other kids that were hurt and exhausted and tired, Al limping around, barely able to walk, getting back onto the field to at least play on the O-line and keep everybody off the quarterback and keep Managuso off the ground. That was a great memory, and then we won that game. So Kevin gets to go on a pretty neat win. So
I got to give a shout out to Kevin too. I learned so much this year. I've coached the defensive side of the ball for 13 years now, and this was the first year he let me call the offense, and I felt like I had never coached football before. It was completely new, and I would make a call, and he'd give me the look like, why on earth would you ever do that? But then he would teach me, or I'd make a call and he'd say, no, stop, do this instead. And then I would at the next applicable time, I'd say, hey, why did you have me run this instead of this? And he would explain it all out. And it's stuff that after 29 years, he just did it automatically. So I learned so much from Kevin. And, that particular game, Al would come off, he had tears in his eyes because I'm sure his ankle hurt. And I know I looked to you, you had come down on the sideline. I was like, can he? And you're like, he's good. He's good. And, there's that trust thing too, because we ended up putting a tackle next to Alistair that had never played that side before. He always played the quick side. And I told him, I said, hey, just listen to Alistair. He's going to tell you exactly what to do. And the trust between those two young men that came up right at that moment was pretty incredible. And we ran a lot behind Alistair because of what Marquette was doing on defense too. So that is one of my favorite memories too, especially to send Kevin out 4-0 in the GNC. Was it 5-3 overall? We didn't get to play Menominee the first game because of the lightning. But that was, and then to beat Marquette, 28-20 in the last game of his career, that was just awesome. So, and you're right, the kids love him, and at the end you could see their smiles were just as big as his. So that was really awesome. So, lost your video there for a second.
Sorry.
No, that's all right.
I think I'm back.
Yeah.
See you. You look just as ugly as ever. Yep.
That'll happen. So, well, that's going to do it. And I want to just say thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And you are the first guest to ever be on our YouTube channel. So congratulations. I don't have any medals or anything. But.
All right. Hey, thanks, Coach. I appreciate it.
That will do it for this episode of the Kingsford Flivver Flash with Coach Eric Johnson. This has been a 3-part series on youth football here in Dickinson County. I encourage you to go back. We have 2 other episodes, one with Coach Brad Slike and one with Mike Floriano. We also did a history of Pop Warner, which is kind of the foundation of youth football around the country. And then this episode with Coach Eric Johnson. So go back and check out all those episodes. If you're listening on a podcatcher, please hit subscribe. You can just hit the cover art or swipe over it and make sure you're subscribed to that. If this is your first time, please share with a friend. You can also go down in the show notes or the video notes and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also send us an email at football@kingsford.org. Until next time, this is Coach Van Duzen. Invest in tomorrow by owning today.